When it comes to painting models, there are many techniques you can adopt to try and give your model an interesting aesthetic. I have previously focused on realism, but in this video I'm going to try something a little bit different. Greetings fellow Earthlings and welcome back to Darlingbrough Sci-Fi Builds. In all of the years I have spent building models, when it comes to painting them, I have usually aimed to create a realistic finish. Whether that means I create a rusty, weathered look on part of a model railway, rocky terrain pieces, or science fiction based models. However, one technique that I have always wanted to try is cel shading. But what exactly is cel shading? I'll explain it more later on in the video. I decided the best thing to do would be to create a small basic model that I can use to practice on. Having scratch built a small crate using a sheet of styrene and a few greeblies that I nicked off a model tank kit, it was then time to start painting. The first stage was to prime the model. After a bit of stream direction issues, guys, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, I painted the lid and the crate in a Vallejo grey primer. Having decided on the shade of yellow that I was using for my mid-tones, I then painted the crate and the lid in Vallejo mid-yellow, aiming to achieve a flat, consistent coverage. Now, one observation that I have made is that everyone else seems to be much better at airbrushing than I am. Now, if you have any helpful hints, tips or tricks on how I can improve, please leave a comment down below. Once I had finished painting all of the parts of the model with the yellow, it was time for the satisfying task of removing the sticks that I had temporarily hot glued into place. Great, now it's time to apply the cel shading. But I've not explained what it is yet, have I? Now, you may not have heard of cel shading, but I guarantee you will have seen examples of it, especially if you've ever read a comic or seen a cartoon. Cel shading uses a limited colour palette to create images which can look two-dimensional. Instead of blending the colours, they are usually painted flat and use high contrasting shades to illustrate areas of brightness and shadows. In addition, thick black outlines are often used to give a distinct definition to the edges of each of the images, further reinforcing the cartoon or comic book style. So the question is, why am I talking about comic books and cartoons when I'm going to be building a 3D model? Well, the idea is that by applying cel shading to a 3D model, you can make it look like a cartoon, which I know is slightly counterintuitive, but just keep watching, let me show you. With the model painted in the yellow base colour, I then chose a darker shade of yellow that I would use to create shadows and a white to create some highlights on the model. Using a paintbrush, I started to paint areas where shadows would appear. I focused on the underneath of any protruding parts on the crate itself. And I also focused on any lower areas on the lid. Adding the darker yellow to these areas gave a fairly rough result that looks a bit like this. Once the yellow was completed, I then repeated the exact same process using Vallejo white, focusing on where the highlights would show. Try to focus on any raised areas and edges as I felt that these would more naturally catch the light. As the crate was fairly flat, I must admit I took some creative license in where the highlights would be. On the lid, again, I chose to primarily highlight the raised areas and edges. For this, I used a smaller and more detailed brush. I must admit, I wanted to try cel shading for a while now, and I actually considered attempting the technique on my small model Spaceship. However, I didn't have the confidence to try it on that particular model at that particular time. It was then time to go over all of the harsh edges and create a black outline. For the outline, you may wish to use black paint and paint the lines on, or you can use a black permanent marker, kind of like what I've done. This stage is where the fun really begins. The black outlines start bringing the style together and making the model really stand out. When I was adding the lines to the lid, I found that going around the edge of the lid gave the impression there was some sort of deep shadow or deep ridge, and I would recommend doing this if you have a thin flat piece on your model. Now when doing the outlines, you don't have to worry about being particularly neat, as small mistakes will actually work and add additional details to your model, such as here. Also, by varying the thickness of the black outlines, you can vary how much contrast there is on the model. Thicker outlines generally give the impression of a heavier shadow. All that was left to do was to add some additional details, such as scuff marks, dirt or scratches, which indicates weathering or damage to the model. Now it's entirely up to you depending on how much you want to apply to this. The more details you add indicates a more weathered or beat up model. So if you're looking to create a model that's heavily battle damaged, for example, just go crazy. Add more and more scribbles all over your model and it will look great. Or if you're looking for something a bit cleaner, then just hold back on it. You can also fill in any final details as well, for example these indented ridges on the lid. Again, with this style, there really is no right or wrong method of doing this. Just have some fun, play around and just see what feels right for you. And there you go, the model is pretty much complete. The only addition I could maybe recommend is when you finished your model, apply a coat of clear matte varnish just to protect the model, but that's an optional choice which I can leave down to you. So now the project is complete, and I must admit I am really pleased with how well it came out, considering how simple it was, and I must admit I am really happy with the results. As I've mentioned before, it is something that I've wanted to try in the past, but I never really found the time or the motivation to do a project like this, which is a shame because now that I've done this project, I felt that it was so simple and easy. I really enjoyed doing it, and it made me realise that you need to spend more time doing things that you actually enjoy in life to counteract the times that you just have to get on and do stuff that you don't like. So it'd be interesting to know, have you ever tried cel shading on a model? Have you perhaps got an army of miniatures that you run that are all painted with the cel shading technique? Is it something that you have not yet tried but you want to have a go at? If so, I definitely recommend it. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Hasta la vista, I'll be back.